Hello, and welcome to I Am Not For Everyone, the podcast for those looking to release shame, heal from trauma, and feel really, really good being their fully expressed, authentic selves. My name's Dr. Lee, and I am a doctorally prepared nurse practitioner and a certified clinical trauma professional, as well as a mom, wife, and a human being navigating the world with complex PTSD. Season 1 of this podcast came about because I was tired of spending decades living in a shame-filled, trauma-laden body and brain. And after doing a lot of work and learning how to return to a safe, grounded place in my life, I knew it was time for me to take my experience in education and use my voice to unsilence myself, to release the leftover shame, and to give others permission to do the same. On Season 2 of this podcast, I'm going to be sharing my experience in education. But even more importantly, I'm going to be bringing on some incredible guests who are going to unsilence themselves. They're going to share their own stories of trauma, shame, and their journeys to healing, resiliency, and self-acceptance. While I believe these episodes will be deeply impactful, I do want to add a disclaimer that we're going to be talking about some potentially triggering topics. So please take the invitation to pause or skip or fast forward on any episode, and to treat yourself gracefully and kindly after each time that you listen. Let's dive in. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of the podcast. I am so excited to have the lovely Sheila with me today. I'm going to let her introduce herself, as always, because the intros are always so much juicier when they come from the guest. So, Sheila, please tell us about you and the work that you do and all the things.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, first, just thank you for having me here. I'm so excited to have a conversation today, and I love the podcast. So this just is like such a good day.
Oh, thank you. I received that. That was awesome.
Yay. And so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sheila Ramsay, and I work as a women's empowerment and sexuality coach. I truly believe that, we are here and we live our fullest lives when we can fully tune into exactly who we are and allow, those deep desires, our true authentic selves to come forward. And I typically work with women because so much of the way women show up in society is denigrated and shamed. And I know we're talking a lot about shame today. And, the fact that we want wealth or power or agency over our sexuality. I work a lot with sexuality. I think when we can actually come to a place where we reclaim these as our own, that is what allows us to heal. And that really is what allows the world to heal around us. It's this divine permission to be who we are. And I want it for everyone.
I love that. Divine permission. Yes, please. More, please. Thank you.
More, please. Yes.
Ooh. So how did you get started in this work? And because if I remember correctly, it's tied to your story.
Absolutely. Honestly, it is so deeply tied to my story. So essentially, we'll go into my story in a second, but it was over the course of this whole decade. And I eventually reached this snapping point where I didn't want to hide anymore. I didn't want to feel shame anymore. And I just stumbled upon Dr. Kimberly Rose Pendleton. I know you had her on the season last year. And I started this coaching work, and it's really allowed me to go deep, to uncover who I am and to release a lot of that shame. And now, I have a lot of training myself. I've entered grad school in sexual health. And now that's what I help my clients with. So, yeah.
That's beautiful. So tell us, you've teased us now. Tell us the actual shame story.
We gotta
give excited to hear this. Yes.
So essentially, I grew up very much like the goody two shoes. I was Little Miss Perfect in school. I got the good grades. I was always kind of awkward and just wanted everyone to be happy. I wanted to achieve well and do good things. So, I was never disappointing anyone. I was always ahead of my game. And so it all changed in a night. December 18th, 2009. I remember to the day because it changed my life. And So I was at a friend of a friend's family Christmas party, and within half a glass of wine, I knew something felt off and someone had put something in my drink. And I remember parts of the night, but essentially someone tried to rape me, and I was pushed down a flight of stairs. I had broken bones and, was chased. And apparently I did fight this person off. I had the wounds to show it. But essentially some people found me hiding under a desk, and I ended up going to the hospital where I did not receive good treatment at all. There was a lot of condescension and not believing what had happened to me. And yeah, I did file a police report, and that in itself is a bit of a journey. I know for those, if there's any listeners who've gone through that, I know that that is a really difficult thing in itself. And so just like, I see you in that. Yeah. And so this night was the most devastating thing I've ever been through. And I remember it was right around Christmas, of course, and we were supposed to be, this is such a funny thing to remember, but it's the way memory works, I guess. We were supposed to be decorating the Christmas tree, and Christmas has been my favorite thing forever. And I remember just sitting there frozen, like I couldn't move. I was just like holding my arm, which was broken, and staring. And like that, to me, that feeling, that like frozen place, I couldn't find the words because I didn't want, my parents picked me up at the hospital, but I honestly to this day haven't told them exactly what happened, because it is, I mean, first for a decade, I really couldn't, because it was too much. And I knew it would hurt the people I love. And I was like, that good girl part of me, that part of me that didn't want to displease anyone, didn't want to upset anyone, was like, this is the worst possible thing I could bring to them because I know it will devastate them. And unfortunately, that is not a good route to healing. And yeah. Well, and I ended up then moving to Australia 3 weeks later on an exchange, which was fantastic. But I left all of my support system. Of course, I knew no one there. No one there knew what had happened. And in hindsight, really probably shouldn't have gone, but and that's when, I drank a lot, far too much to cover it up, to try to not feel what I was feeling. And I think that's really when I like sealed in this like deep repression. And I have since been diagnosed with PTSD, like, and dealt with that for almost a decade. And so like within that was this knowing that I was wrong. I was broken. I didn't experience friendship the way other people experience it. Like even in my memories, it's like I'm like kind of looking at my life from above. Like I'm not in it. It's not real. And I mean, right after it happened, I wasn't able to have sex with men. And up until that point, I had very much identified as heterosexual. And I just shut down that part of my life completely. And then in my later 20s, as I began to reopen that, I found myself just pushing people away. Anything that was remotely secure was like, and it was just, yeah, I felt so deeply broken in that time. And I was so ashamed of this story, this piece of like, I should be able to feel better than this. I shouldn't have to put this on all these people around me.
Yeah. Wow. I'm having a lot of feelings listening to that. That is, well, and I always think it's so interesting when, especially when I have guests on talking about sexual assault or, some form of, abuse in a relationship, having been in that relationship prior to the relationship I'm in now, our stories will be so different. And yet there's pieces that every time I'm like, oh, yep, that feeling or that piece or that part, like I remember that. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things that you said, I think I want to tease out here because so often when we are, as women, harmed by someone else, and there is anything in the situation of which we had control, even if 99% of it was outside of our control, a lot of times we focus in on that 1%, right? Of like, but what if or what if I did this, or what if I did that? And to be fair, that doesn't come from, that's not an internal thing. That's something that is externally placed upon us to think about, like, but what could you have done differently? Right?
Absolutely.
And I'm thinking about my own experience with filing a police report and having the police basically asking me, but what could you have done differently? Right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about your story, like I can't see anything even in that of what could I have done differently. And so the other thing that came up for me as you're talking about this shame, it's layered, right? So there's the shame of like, okay, but let me dissect this piece by piece and bit by bit. Maybe I shouldn't have had the extra, like the glass of wine. Maybe I shouldn't have done this. Maybe I should have told that. Like there's all of that. But then the second layer of shame is also around how quickly you get over the thing.
Yeah.
And it's this whole, we shame ourselves of, I should be over this already. This shouldn't be affecting me to the level that it is. Why is this popping up over here in this completely unrelated place? And so we get in this like spiral.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think for me, like that layering very much came from, growing up in a very like British stoicism kind of household. Like we don't talk about our feelings, like we avoid conflict at all costs. And I think the problem when we do that is we're pushing everything so far away. We never let anyone in. And like in this case, when I very much needed help, I felt so deeply unable to ask for it. And I think that is something as well that is like so deeply common between so many people who have experiences like this. It's like, it's like, what can we do in that moment? What could I have done? Actually, it reminded me of one thing. I remember the police officers asking me like, well, what were you wearing? It's like, excuse me.
Yeah. Mine asked me how many sexual partners I had had. And I was like, I'm really confused. And I was 17. I didn't know I could refuse to answer their questions. And looking back, I was like, what did that have to do with anything about what just happened?
Absolutely nothing.
And like the same with yours. What were you wearing? I could have been wearing a full body, like a trash bag. Like that's not the point, right?
Exactly. It's not, it has absolutely nothing to do with what occurred. And I think we have this sense of, there's that in the moment, like, what could I have done differently? And like, we fixate on some things like that. And I am like grateful that there were certain things in that moment where I was like, no, this has nothing to do with me. Yeah. But I think also what we've done differently, like, I think it extends for as long as it can extend for any amount of time afterwards, I guess, depending on how we process it and if it's stored in our bodies and like what happens to that trauma. And I know for myself, the thinking of like, I should be able to get over it. This shouldn't be a problem anymore. I should be able to be normal. I should be able to date. I shouldn't feel this broken. I mean, eventually got to a point where I just like accepted it and was like, well, I guess this is just me.
Yep. Felt that.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is just how society sees me. This is what I'm good for. This is just who I am. This is what it is. And which is so interesting because like the shame causes us to cut off pieces and parts of ourselves that are who we are, but then it also like attaches pieces that aren't who we are.
Oh, that's so true. Yes. I'm just gonna let that sink in for a moment. I completely agree. It kind of it completely distorts our sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, attaches these pieces of us that aren't actually us. It's a story, right? It's like these stories that like get dug in that, it's no one's fault that they exist. Well, except maybe, the rapist's fault.
Yeah.
But it's those pieces of us that almost become part of our identity. And that's not really what our identity is underneath it all.
Well, you and I haven't had too much like interaction outside of a few of the social media communities that we're a part of. Mm-hmm. And I would never call you a good girl, right? Like that is not, which I hope you take as a compliment.
I absolutely do.
Yeah. And most people getting to know me at this point would never be like, oh, you're a good girl, right? Mm-hmm. And that is an identity that was placed on me, and it sounds like was placed on you from a very early age. And that identity still tries to show up some days. Mm-hmm. Like the egoic sense of like, I want to people please. I want to make everyone happy. I want to look like I'm professional. Like that's the adult version. I'm professional, right?
Yeah. I'm on top of things. I'm
on top of things. I've got this handled. Like I'm this badass mom and wife and coach and,
everyone
all the things. Yes. She still shows up sometimes, and it's so cute because she'll show up in like different ways. Like she'll be like, oh, I'm showing up and like, no, I'm the badass boss babe. And I'm like, no, but like, actually that's just another form of the good girl trying to pretend that she can do it all and have it all and be it all. And, but in a way that is like not internally desired.
Yeah, absolutely. I know for myself, a lot of it comes up around intimacy and like dating and like going out. And suddenly there'll be this moment being like, oh, well, like, let's not say that because it'll like piss this person off. And then like, the like part of me that is unpacked that is like, no. Like,
yeah. Like your intuition, like soul is like, actually, we are going to say that thing and it's going to be okay. Like we'll be able to handle whatever comes up. I love that you're bringing this up because, as we release shame, like more of that part of ourselves is allowed to come out. And oftentimes it is an internal struggle of figuring out like, what is mine? Like who am I?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and with that, like that internal struggle, those pieces of ourselves that are maybe a bit bolder or a bit more overt or bitchy or whatever.
Yeah.
Those can feel threatening in themselves because we've been taught that those are bad. And so it's like this like practice in emotional regulation of like looking at yourself being like, what do I want? What do I appreciate? How do I soothe myself and realize like these parts of me are valuable. These parts of me deserve a voice. And like, how can I allow that through safely?
Yes. It's reclaiming and remembering the pieces that got cut off and like pulling them back in. I always use the analogy of the cage, right? Like you like, I imagine like pulling these black like spirits out of myself and like putting them in a cage, and like putting them in a dark closet. They can just live there. Yep. And like, I'm going to pretend the closet doesn't exist, but we all know the closet exists, right?
Yeah.
And like, when I actually go back and I'm like, wait a second though, like that's not this black demonic, like dark, twisty piece of me that needs to be hated on and shamed on and locked up and left in the dark forever. Like she has purpose. She has meaning. She is part of me for a reason. And cutting her off doesn't actually make her go away.
Mm-hmm. I had a really interesting conversation recently playing with this like piece of like the darkness within us. And this kind of goes into that like good girl persona. I think a lot of people see me and I'm like light and bubbly and happy. And that's like a lot of me. And there's this piece where I am so happy to like talk about ownership over your sexuality and going into the taboos and like that kind of like dark seductressy vibe. And the thing that I have found is bringing out this darkness makes like those bubbly, sparkly parts that much brighter.
Mm-hmm.
And they like create this beautiful, like chiaroscuro, like this like depth between them that allows us to be so dynamic. And I think having gone from a place where like everything was like pretty like grayish, that's my like bleh color.
I like that. I was like, wait, what? And I was like, oh, grayish, like gray
that, like,
and beige.
neutral.
I like this.
Yeah. That like is just like, you know, trying to please everyone, like never going to the highs, never going to the lows. So like when we can, you know, heal enough, come to a place, learn to regulate our nervous system and bring those two things together, I just find the sense of our beings just becomes this like gorgeous vortex, and they play off each other and it like deepens who we are.
Yeah. I'm chewing on what you said. I feel like that needs like chewed before swallow. That was really just good. And I'm, you know, there's a part of your story that's sticking in my mind that I want to bring up for the listeners, because I think that this is a really big piece. And it's something I went through. It's something you shared of like the numbing and dissociative tactics that we use after we go through something like this to try to like prevent the emotion from coming out, because the event itself is done, right? And yet the aftermath, the effects, the emotions that are there, to me actually felt scarier than what had happened to me in the first place. Cause like I could draw a beginning and an end to that. But the stuff that was left over afterwards, that like there was no like there was no end to it. I was like, I don't know what to do with this. Like, I don't know how to, it doesn't feel safe to let this out. Like, I feel like I could full on goddess Kali burn all and everything down.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I'm going to keep it like tucked in, but in order to hold that in, I'm going to need to numb the hell out of myself, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to hold it. And so you talked about drinking a lot, and I, you know, my experience happened my first semester at college. And so like, it was socially acceptable to drink a lot. Yeah.
And it's really easy to hide in that, right? It's so easy. Like, and I think we can be very good at hiding in a crowd, if you know what I mean. So when these things happen and we repress, all we want to do is be okay. All we want to do is fit in and not feel so fucking weird. I'm swearing a lot. I'm sorry. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, no. I had another guest ask that, and I'm like, look, it's a shame-free podcast. Like, you say what you want to say. I'm not going to be like, you can't say that.
Fantastic. So essentially, I just think that hiding, that shutting it down is this way where it's like, I can't feel those things. The best way to not do that is to just hide them away. And then maybe I can fit in and no one will notice. And at least for me, my experience was that I didn't want this to be a thing. I didn't want it to define who I was. I didn't want it to override my ability to have a life. And I mean, little did I know at the time that repression was kind of stopping me from living the life I wanted to.
The very thing you're trying to avoid is what ends up happening. And then there's just so much more shame tied up in that of like, okay, well, how much, like, but I am drinking a lot. Like, I know this isn't good for me. And like, I know that, you know, for me, I was lucky I met my husband when I did, because I actually like really leaned into sexual promiscuity afterwards. Cause I was like, look, like if nobody's like, if this is all I'm good for, let's have at it. Right. Like I'm at least going to be in charge.
Yeah.
And, you know, so it's interesting, like, but there was a lot of shame in that then too, because again, I'm not being the good girl anymore, and I'm not, and so it was like all of these pieces and parts were at war within me, and my body is going like, if you would just let this go.
Yeah.
And I couldn't hear it. And it sounds like, you had a similar experience of like, I'm hearing my body, but what I've been taught this entire time is to keep shoving it down instead of to actually let it out. My body is sending me a message that society is telling me is fundamentally wrong.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience. I mean, for myself, while I didn't actually have penetrative sex with men for those years, I became very sexually explorative with women. I still had occurrences with men. They just weren't penetrative. And then once I actually did start that again, it was very much getting, into the BDSM scene and exploring and trying threesomes and like all this crazy stuff. But it was never with an emotional intimacy. And so it was always just like using things, trying things, almost as if I was trying to figure out what to do with my body now. Yeah. Cause it was so lost in that.
Well, and I'm appreciative of you using the word explorative, because I heard myself say the word promiscuity and I was like, oh, that's a patriarchal word. Like I would like to pull that one back. And because again, there's like some judgment, there's some shame when we use that word. And I appreciate what you're saying here too, because I think that this ties into one of the places that we are so unwilling to talk about, which is addiction of any kind, right?
Absolutely.
I'm so glad that the mental health field realm is starting to catch up here, because when we used to evaluate people for anxiety or depression or addiction or substance abuse disorder, we would just start with that. And now we're starting to do trauma intakes beforehand and being like, but wait a second, like what's happened to you, right? Like, what are you trying to numb out? What are you trying to get out of your body from? Like, what are you trying to escape from? Yeah. And what's been so like fascinating to me as someone who really like, it wouldn't have been defined as alcoholism, but it would have been defined as disordered use, right? I could like, the alcohol, I didn't care about the alcohol. I just cared about not feeling what I was feeling.
Exactly. Yeah. And it was the same for me.
So like, I have to wonder, even just in our current society of how we treat people, even when we call people addicts, I'm like, oh my gosh, we're assigning a character flaw. We're assigning a character trait. We're telling people that they are an addict instead of saying they are someone with an addiction.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, all this language, I think it just, so much of it just reinforces that shame. As you said, calling someone an addict, calling someone promiscuous, like it's, all of these words are essentially in service of this patriarchal conditioning that keeps us small in the first place. So yeah, I really appreciate you looking at this language and identifying it and actually going there in this podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm glad that we're having the conversation about sex too, because I think it's one of the places that it's like one of the most socially acceptable places to numb. Alcohol and sex are the two most socially acceptable ways to numb in our society. Well, no, two of the most. Social media and scrolling is probably the most.
Yeah. And that one I think people really don't talk about, but I mean, even with sex and alcohol, it's so normal for people to be like, oh yeah, like whether it's like shutting down the sex life and it's like you're not having what you want, it's like you're avoiding it, that kind of thing, that's like considered normal in marriages. Yeah. Like it's fine, don't worry, it's just a phase. Or drinking and like having a nightcap. And honestly, one thing I've really noticed is through this pandemic, that also has become even more acceptable.
Yeah. Because think about it, like all of the things that we were doing to numb ourselves, to dissociate, to stay outside of our bodies, well, they were maybe working, right? Shopping, eating, like sleeping, sex, drugs, whatever. And then we just added this massive trauma trigger on that like you cannot escape from.
Yeah.
You can't get away from it. Like actually, do you follow Jared Leto at all, the actor? He's one of my, are you familiar with him?
I'm familiar with him. Yeah.
Yeah. He's one of my favorite actors. And I loved him because he came out like in May. I think it was, I'm going to probably botch this a little bit, but like May of 2020 and was like, what's going on? He had been like off on this like solo, cycle spiritual journey, like in the middle of nowhere, and like literally returned back to society 2 months later and was like, what the hell? And
oh my God, that's crazy.
Yeah. So I'm like maybe one of the few people on the planet who like didn't know this was a thing. Right. And
wow.
And like, but for the rest of us, it was like, it was in our faces every single day. And so I can't get away from this trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So I got a numb, and no one has taught me the skills of how to cope with a trauma while it's continually occurring. That's not something that we have conversations about ever.
Yeah. Why would we be taught that in school? It's only like the most handy life skill ever.
I know. I have I guess it won't be a secret mission anymore. I have a mission of like bringing trauma-informed care into the core foundational education for everyone who goes into healthcare or academia in the country, because like, this is what you need to know. Like, yeah, we can learn Common Core math and like, I can teach people how to start IVs and things like that. And also, what would it look like if everyone knew what it looked like when someone was having a trauma response? What would it look like if everyone knew what it felt like to have a trauma response and what to do if they were having one? Like, that's the stuff we need to know.
Well, I absolutely love that. Fully support it and completely agree. And it's beautiful.
It sounds like you're doing this work, like you've done this work for yourself, obviously, but like, it sounds like this is what you're doing in your work as well.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I tend to have a bit more of a lens from being in grad school for sexual health. There's a lot of focus on comprehensive sex education and, the kind of skills that we need to build, as you say, to have the conversations, to be able to recognize when certain things are happening. And then in terms of the trauma-informed piece, I learned it myself first to like recognize what is this happening to me and being like, oh, and then recognizing triggers all the time once I realized what was happening. But through that process, really being able to uncover it. And then I did a coaching certification last year. That was a trauma-informed, trauma-based coaching certification. And it's everything. Everything comes back to it. The way we communicate with our partners, the way we run away from certain things. So I really think so much of the reasons why we don't go after the things we want, or might not even be able to identify what we want, comes back to trauma responses and triggers and like being in this state where we're just like constantly trying to avoid rather than actively process.
Yeah. So, you shared about the steps you took to release and heal from your shameful experience. And because I haven't asked this question before, full consent to not answer it or answer it in whatever way feels safe for you. Mm-hmm. What are the pieces and parts you still feel like you're working
on? I think the biggest thing that is like kind of this really beautiful ongoing process is deepening into intimacy with others. And this, I think, is both in friendship and in relationships. So I've been in the dating world now and like much more so for the last like year. I shut it down for a bit with COVID, understandably, but really allowing myself to show up absolutely fully, to not hide anything, to like allow myself to be an open book, which is really vulnerable. And some people aren't ready to receive that either. And in those cases, I recognize, okay, this isn't the person for me because this has become such a deep part of my life. And then with that, to first allow myself to absolutely deeply experience the joy and the love and all the bigness, like the scariness of letting yourself fall for someone and how scary it can be to let yourself show up so fully. And this is something that I'm really proud to say has like really become very integrated in me. And then allowing myself to feel the heartbreak. And, this is something kind of recent for me that is still a little raw. And allowing myself to be present in that and to recognize that I can be so proud of how I let myself show up and connect deeply enough to feel this kind of heartbreak and to feel, a little lost, disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also such a beauty in that, because for so many years, for a decade, I didn't get to feel these things because I didn't allow myself to. And so while, these like shadowy emotions are harder to process and, are maybe, they don't feel like roses and bubbles. Like,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but it's been so worth it. So I guess that's kind of what I'm still like working on and growing through and learning to really move through, that like these things are exciting and fun. We get to have them.
Wow. That's beautiful.
That's
really beautiful. You're creating psychological safety for yourself, meaning you are creating a safe, supportive space where you allow yourself to feel comfortable showing up as whoever and however you desire, and holding yourself and trusting yourself to be able to hold yourself if that doesn't work for the other person.
Absolutely. And even beyond that, in my business, being able to come on this podcast and say like, this happened pretty recently, but I know I can show up as me and I can show up with where I'm at, and it doesn't mean anything about me. Like, these are emotions that we get to feel, we get to process, we get to move through. Every single human has these things that we go through. It doesn't mean that I'm broken or I failed. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. It's kind of this ability to be as deeply myself as I can. I guess like you would call it authenticity, which sometimes I think that can be thrown around a little.
Yes.
Really, but I think you know what I mean.
I do. No, I think you're using the word as it's intended of, actually I love that you're bringing this up because, we're both in the coaching world and we're in similar realms. And I hear the word authenticity shown up or thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
And what's so interesting to me is that I feel like there's still a little bit of shame in there of like authentic, as long as it like looks like this. Yeah. Right. Like authentic with an asterisk of like, and unless you're going to talk about X, Y, and Z, and then we'd rather you not be authentic. Right. This whole podcast for me, this whole experience, shifting from season 1 was like, I'm going to really be authentic and share some shit out here that like, people really may not like. Yeah, people really may not like this. This is an unsilencing of the self, right? And then going into season 2, this is a way for us to like collectively break the silence on a lot of things that we just don't talk about.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so that is real raw authenticity, is like being willing to say the thing even when the, not that we're having this happen, but like even when the guest says something that I'm like, oh, I really disagree with that, or like, oh, that is not how I would do the thing. And then checking in with myself and being like, and great, I'm so glad that they feel safe enough to share this on here. Like, it doesn't matter if I agree or I don't. That's not the point. The point is that we're both allowed to like show up and express ourselves and feel safe in doing so.
Absolutely. And I think so much of that is doing the trauma-informed work and learning how to recognize triggers and traumas in yourself and in others. Because like, if we can see in this moment, like first, like, am I showing up in a way that feels true to me? Am I feeling open and receptive to others? Or do I have my defenses up? And like being able to see the difference between those things, I think that really allows us to recognize when we are really talking from our heart in a truly authentic way, and recognize, maybe when we're not and we're trying to hide something.
Yeah. When we're either like shoving something in the closet or we're like putting on the ill-fitting outfit where we're like, see, like this is me. And everyone's like, no, it's not. Like, I don't, are you sure? I don't think that's you. Right. People who are looking closely People who care enough to look closely can look at the ill-fitting outfit and be like, I don't think that's you.
Absolutely. And that, like, I think speaks so much to like, those are the people who like really see you, who are doing the work with you, who are like your people.
Yeah. One of my favorite things to do with other people is, you know, when we're in moments where the space is able, like where we are able to have this, because that's something I always have to check in with is like, is this conversation alive? Like, do we have enough space for this conversation to happen right now? Because sometimes things are chaotic and crazy, and doing this would be actually harmful instead of helpful. Mm-hmm. But in a moment of like space where I'm with someone and I can tell that they're not okay, right? Yeah. Is like saying, hey, how are you? And then being like, I'm fine. And then making deep eye contact for a few seconds and being quiet for a minute and being like, are you?
Yeah.
And then having the ability to like, be like, oh, wait a second. Like, she's safe and I can actually tell her how I am. And it's so amazing. You can watch the body language change. You can watch the, like the emotions come up and it's this unfolding and like de-armoring. Mm-hmm. And then a lot of times they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry I said all those things. And I'm like, no, like it was my pleasure to like sit here and listen to you be able to unload that for a minute.
I think giving people the space to truly be, like actually be where they are, who they are, honestly, in a moment is such a gift. Yeah. And I think it is something that like we don't value enough, we don't articulate enough. I think allowing people to be where they are and who they are in that honest capacity is just so important.
Yeah. You know who taught me that, by the way, is my daughter when she was 3. My daughter is, you know, there's, oh my gosh, she's the little ones, right? The ones who haven't had a chance to forget who they are and what they know and how powerful they are. Yeah. She was 3 and she walked up to this like big, beefy, burly man I think we were in a grocery store and she like tugged on his pants. I mean, like she barely went up to maybe his thigh. She like tugged on his pants. And I was like, what is she? And before I could even react, she goes, you okay? Aww. And he's like, I'm fine. And she goes, no. She made this grown man cry.
Oh my goodness.
And in the moment, like I was not trauma informed. Like this was, you know, 7 years ago. I like scooped her up and I was like, I'm so sorry. And we ran out of the store. And what it really made me realize is like, we all, you know, she's very empathetic. Like she's very good at feeling people's feelings. And also like we all have that capability when we slow down, you know, when the I'm fine that you get is not an I'm fine. And it's just that so often we're like, I don't know how to have the conversation to help this person get to on the other side of like, I'm not fine. I don't know how to hold that space. I don't know that I have the capacity right now to hold that space for this person. And so like learning how to do that has been one of the, I mean, you know, I know all the embodiment practices, all the tips, all the tricks, all those things, but just learning how to actually be able to be attuned and present for someone in a moment like that is probably my favorite thing that I've learned. And I love that I didn't learn it from any of the courses or certifications. I learned it from the 3-year-old, right?
I adore this stories. And I think that is utterly amazing. It also, in that moment where you're saying like, I don't know if I know how to hold the space. I don't know if I have the space to go there. The other thing that it was for me in those moments was, what if they don't want to go there? What if they're not comfortable? What if they don't want me to ask?
Yeah.
And I actually think, I mean, of course, like we can always add on a like, you know, if you want, like I have space for you, or like, this is like totally within what feels good to you. And like, if you consent to this, I'm here. But I think often like people need us to be willing to go first.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, of course, inviting what is feeling okay to them, but like just allowing them the opportunity. Because if we all just shut it down, none of us are ever going to talk about anything.
Yeah. Yeah. It's remembering that like we're animals, we live in animal bodies. Kasha Urbanik talks about this, right? Like the animal body in me knows how to respond to the animal body in you. And like just learning how to trust that of like, I can show up in my body, which by the way, requires embodiment, which a lot of us, again, we're actively trying to get out of our bodies so often that we don't know how to be in them.
Yeah.
But when you learn how to really be in your body, you just doing that models to other people that it's safe for them to do it as well.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that goes for everything. Like once we finally give ourselves that permission to say what we mean, to hold space for others, to like go to the deep places, to, reclaim our desires, all of that. Once one person starts and says like, yes, I'm going to do this, it changes for everyone around us.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm sure, I know many people have had a similar experience, but like from my experience, I know in all the changes I've been through, I've seen changes like in some of my friends and families and how we interact and how the conversation has deepened and just things like that. I think that permission, back to the permission, full circle.
Yeah. Back to the divine permission. And actually, I think that this brings us really full circle in a moment, because I just want to point out that like both of us, the experiences that we had, the good girls, getting broken and fixed and not being beautiful or perfect anymore. Right.
Yeah.
That's why we're right here talking to each other.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Which is like wild when you think about it of, we always act like, a lot of times I hear people talk about how trauma is such a bad thing. And I'm like, trauma absolutely is a painful thing.
Yeah.
And, a lot of quote unquote bad things happen from it. And also like, there are so many beautiful gifts and like meaning and purpose that can come out of it. Mm-hmm. But in order for that to happen, you have to let yourself feel it.
Yeah. One of my favorite things that I kind of have taken on from a mentor is nothing happens for a reason. Like this didn't happen to you for a reason, but it does not go to waste. Every piece of it is going to be there at some point and you will learn from. There's wisdom there.
Yeah. There's wisdom there. There's wisdom. Like, I love that, because I think for some, it doesn't go to waste if you choose for it to not go to waste.
Yeah. It took me a decade to get here.
Yeah. Same.
There's no timeline on it, right? Like, and we all get to a certain point and ready to confront it. And we begin feeling okay at a certain point. And like, for me, it took hitting kind of a rock bottom. I haven't quite gone there in this story yet, but I ended up in an abusive relationship. I had an abusive roommate situation and an abusive job. And I don't use that word lightly. I'm saying that very intentionally. And within a period of 6 months, I pulled the rug out of all of them because I hit this point where I was like, my life can't look like this anymore. I can't be crying every day anymore. I can't be. And I was just like, I don't know how it's going to change. I don't know what I need, but I know I'm the common denominator.
Oof. That one just hit my chest like a sack of potatoes. Like, yes, I'm the common denominator. After the trauma is done, like I think this is the hardest thing to hear.
Yeah.
The hardest thing to realize is after the trauma is done, anything that perpetuates it is on me.
Yeah. Which, there were times in my 20s that would have been so triggering for me.
Oh, yeah.
I would have been so upset even hearing that. But at some point, like, you are the lead actor in your life. Like, you are the one who is making decisions around what you're doing and where you're at. And yeah, you are the common denominator. And so for me, it was like reaching this point of like, well, let's go look at this.
Yeah. And I think what you said there is so important, because there's this, it's a two things are true situation of like, it's not your fault it happened, and blaming yourself for it happening is not and shaming yourself for it happening is not healthy. And it is your responsibility moving forward to decide how that's going to affect you. And if you had told me that in the first couple of years after I was assaulted, I would have probably thrown up both middle fingers at you and walked out of the room.
Yep.
Right? Like I would not have been in a place to receive that. And so, hey, listeners, if you just heard me say that or heard Sheila say her part and you threw up your middle fingers, or you decided that, if you felt like saying a really fun word at either of us, cool, great, like been there, get it. And my, one of the psychiatrists that I learned from had this saying that I really loved. And again, it's like a harsh truth. He's like, are you done suffering yet?
Yeah.
And he said, and here's what I want you to hear, is that's not a judgmental statement, because you might not be done. You may need to suffer a little bit more. You may need to hold on to that pain a little bit more because you're not ready to release it. And there will be but he's like, what I want you to hear is like, there will be a point where you will be ready.
Yeah.
And that point comes faster the more you ask yourself that question.
It's true. I absolutely agree. And I suspect, had I come across the coaching industry, known what it was earlier, maybe I would have gotten there sooner. I don't know. But
I don't know either. Yeah.
Yeah. But like, it doesn't really matter, because I needed that time to get to where I was. I needed that time to understand, like, to get to a point where I just decided, like, this is my life, and I can either let it run me, or I can, take a step forward, a baby step every day, and figure out how I want to run it, how I want to live it.
And I think the other thing I'll say is this is like, I think sometimes when we have this conversation, people think that means that like they have to be the ones to pull themselves out of it. And I don't want that to be like, just because it's your responsibility, it's the ability, you have the ability to respond. That's all that word means. Yeah. It doesn't mean that you can't get support. It doesn't mean that you can't be so deeply supported while doing this, that people can hold you and see you and hear you and be there for you. And I think that is also something that I don't think I was ready to hear for a while, because, my husband was there and he was like, I've got you. I will hold you. I will do whatever. And honestly, for those first couple of years, what I needed to be able to do was push him away and have him not leave.
Yeah.
And it was literally like, I need to keep pushing you to see that you're not going to leave, that you're going to just stay there and take whatever it is that I give to you. And there's a part that feels guilty and sad about that. And there's another part that was like, but that was what you needed. And he was able to offer that. He understood what he was offering. And so if you are someone who's listening to and going like, oh, well, if I have to take the responsibility, that means I have to do this by myself, or that someone else can't ask me the question, are you done suffering yet? And if not, cool, I'll stay here by you, while also making sure I'm taken care of, by the way.
Yeah. Yep.
Like, it doesn't have to be done alone. And actually it goes so much quicker and easier when you don't do it by yourself.
Yeah. I was just going to reiterate, like, you don't have to do it alone. I remember, I think that's really why, like, I didn't tell anyone my story. There was like 3 people who knew for like 6 years or so. And then there was only a couple more. And it's really only been since I was about 30 that I started to be a lot more vocal about my story and started sharing it more, because then I finally had the safety. But the thing is, that whole time I was trying to do it alone, because in my head, I didn't want to burden others. And the thing I realized was, people want to help you if you ask for it. And like, and that was one of the most freeing things. And that was one of the hardest things for me to learn, actually, was how to open up to support. Yeah. And like, it doesn't have to be like you're opening this like massive Pandora's box all in one go. It can be as simple as like making a phone call. It can be as small as anything, asking a friend to go for a walk with you. Yeah. Even if you don't even go into the story, doesn't have to be this like telling your life story and everything that happened, things you want to heal all in one go. Honestly, we don't know what that is usually anyway.
Oh yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah. We have a phrase that we use in our family when we remember. We're working on making it more of a consistent thing is, when someone is really upset, when somebody's triggered, when someone's having big feelings, we call them big feelings in our house, right? Yeah. Kids. Do you want comfort? Do you want support? Do you want witnessing?
Yep.
And sometimes the answer is, I just want you to listen to me. And then I want you to give me a hug, right? So I want witnessing and then I want support. And sometimes we'll jump in. I'm a big solutions person, right? So I'm I'll jump in with the solutions. And my kids are actually gotten really good at being like, Mom, I don't want solutions.
I love that.
I used to say this to my own mom and I'd be like, don't social work me. I didn't realize that's what I was asking for, but I was like, she was a social worker. And I said, don't social work me. Don't try to fix it. I just need you to listen. Right. And so, that's a phrase that you can use with if anyone's listening and I don't know how to ask for what I need. You can start to ask each other those questions and support each other relationally and learn how to hold boundaries around that. And that's one of the best ways you can do it. Cause then you don't even have to talk about the thing. Right.
Absolutely. Sometimes it's just about recognizing the body needs some comfort and you need a hug. Maybe you don't actually have to talk about anything. Sport happens in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. Okay. So I've so deeply enjoyed this. My soul is so happy after having this conversation with you. I want to ask you the one thing that I ask all my guests. Mm-hmm. What is one piece of advice that you would give to a listener who recognizes themselves in your story?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think first and foremost is I just want to say you are never too broken. You are never too weird. You are never too far gone. All the parts of you that feel like a lot or that are resonating with this conversation that we've had today. A, there is wisdom in there. B, you have so much strength in you for getting to where you are. And you can use that to start taking those baby steps because it is never too late. I would just want to if I could shake the shoulders of the world and say something, it's just you're not too broken. And if you get to that point where you realize you're tired of the struggle, it does get to change. And it's just taking a little step forward towards it in whatever way you know how. And you will find the path, I promise. And I love you.
Oh, that was beautiful. Thank you. I love that. Yeah. You aren't that's not the truth. You are not too broken. That's not the truth. Yeah. Where can our listeners, I know many of them did, since they've resonated with you, where can our listeners find you? How can they learn more, work with you, learn more from you?
Absolutely. Well, you can come find me at Luxurious Feminine Power on Instagram. Luxurious Feminine Power is my brand. And you can find me, Sheila Ramsay, on Facebook. I have a Facebook group, Luxurious Feminine Power. And right now I've opened a couple spots for one-on-one coaching. So if this journey has resonated with you, if you're I am tired and you're wondering what the first steps are, I invite you to DM me. Let's have a conversation. I genuinely want the best for you and, always no pressure. And we can just, if you are curious to explore that, let's have a chat.
Beautiful. Okay. Well, we'll make sure that all of that information is in the show notes so that they can contact you in whatever way feels good for them. Mm-hmm. And thank you again. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and being vulnerable and going first. And I deeply appreciate it.
I have just absolutely, it's been such a privilege to have this conversation here today. I am so happy and my heart is full. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're very welcome. My pleasure. All right, everyone. We will see you next week. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you're interested in learning more about how you can help yourself and others release shame, heal from trauma, and create healthier, safer, more mutually beneficial relationships, I want to invite you to head to our website, institutefortrauma.com. At institutefortrauma.com, you'll find free resources, be able to connect to our free online community, and view our courses and trainings, including our foundational trauma-informed, psychologically safe certification, aka the TRIP certification. Head to institutefortrauma.com today to learn more.